He taught me so much about writing and reading and the importance of like every single line and every single word in a line, and every word has to carry its weight, and what not so much what the words mean, but also what they're doing, kind of impact on your brain. But just the other day I was teaching in my class, and one of the things I really like to do with my students is I like to put their work on the overhead and just like examine their writing almost like it's poetry, even though it's not, but like poetry kind of creeps in. And I told the students, can you hear that? Can you hear that in your brain? Can you see it? Can you taste it? Those words that she used about it being fizzy and fresh, it reminded me of my Shakespeare professor about how every word counts and every word, creates a certain sensation in the brain. Stephen Booth, he was one who taught me how to read and taught me how to write and taught me how to teach.
Welcome to AI Learn Insights. We all know what writing is, but do we? In this podcast, I interview Lisa Lieberman, a writer and a visual artist. She's also a college English teacher, editor, copywriter, and reporter. She has been a working writer for 25 plus years. She has won several writing awards, including the prestigious Gruener Award in Fresno for meritorious journalism. She recently wrote an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education. It's called AI and the Death of Student Writing. Our conversation is about AI and student writing, but I was also keen to explore her views about the craft of writing. With AI, something is gained, but what is lost? Ralph Waldo Emerson, in one of his earliest essays, delivered as an oration in 1837, it's called The American Scholar, quotes the old oracle, "All things have two handles. Beware of the wrong one." As we rush headlong into the world of AI, are we grasping the right handle? I hope you enjoy my conversation with Lisa Lieberman. I also encourage you to visit her website, including her new work in the form of blog posts called The Art of Isolation, which explores how to live artfully alone. So, hello, Lisa. Welcome to AI Learn Insights.
Well, thank you for having me. It's exciting.
Let's start with, how did you become a writer?
Well, to begin with, everybody in my family is a writer. My dad is a writer. My cousins are writers. My brothers and sisters are writers. I have a third cousin named Herb Cohen who wrote "You Can Negotiate Anything." He's a Brooklyn, New York Jew, and he negotiated the Iran. Remember when we had the Iranian hostage situation in the 1980s? Yeah. He was the one who worked with Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan to secure their release. And so he is a true negotiator, and it just runs in my family. Everybody's a writer. I started writing. Well, I always read stories. My dad read stories to me growing up, and I loved to read, and I cultivated a real love of reading, and then I started writing stories. I wrote a story called The Purple Blanket in 5th grade, and I came in second place for the Young Authors Contest, which was a big deal for me. It was huge. And I've always been a writer ever since I was a child.
And you grew up where?
Well, I grew up in a lot of places. I was born in Chicago. My parents are New York Jews, but I didn't grow up there. I grew up in Chicago, New Orleans, and Los Angeles. We moved around a lot. And then I went to school at UC Berkeley. So I've moved around a whole lot in my life.
And how did you end up at UC Berkeley?
Well, let's see, I was a high school senior. I was only, I think, 16 when I applied. And it just seemed like a great place. I didn't have any specific plan about going to Berkeley, but I'm really glad I went there. It was an amazing school. I met amazing people, really high energy, a lot of creative thinking there, and just a lot of creativity there. There's just no place like Berkeley.
And when you entered Berkeley, did you know that you wanted to be a writer, or
no,
as a profession? Yeah. What were you thinking?
Well, I wanted to become a lawyer, but my dad wouldn't let me. My dad has no opinions really about anything, but he thought my parents are divorced, and he had to, went through a difficult divorce, and he just thought all lawyers are bad. And so I wanted to be a lawyer, and then he didn't want me to, and I kind of just went along with that. I kind of drifted around. I didn't know what I was going to do until like my mid-20s. I became a writer then. I became a professional writer then. I hadn't really thought about doing it seriously, but then I did. And then I've been a professional writer ever since I was 25.
And your Berkeley experience, was that where you mostly just studying, hanging out? What was the experience like?
Well, I lived in a co-op. Berkeley is a really interesting place. When I first went there, I tried to get into the dorms like other freshmen, but they were too impacted. So I got into a student cooperative, which is basically student housing run by students. And when I went there, it was an amazing place because it was people of all ages, freshmen to seniors. Normally when you're a freshman, you go and you're just there with the other freshmen, and they're all in the dorms drinking beer and things like that. And the co-op was different because we had people from all over the world: Nigeria, South Africa, Australia, all parts of the United States, every different ethnic group, all kinds of different ages, all kinds of different majors. And the people I lived with in the co-ops they were my main social group, and I became friends with them. And I'd say that's where I got a lot of my real education, was just rubbing elbows with them and making friends with them and just having all kinds of amazing conversations about different things that I would just never have had as a young 17-year-old girl from California. Berkeley just tends to draw out a lot of really amazing, intelligent, creative people. It was a really wonderful place to go to school, and it was a wonderful living situation for me. And then, of course, the school itself, there were some brilliant professors, and some professors made a huge impact on me that I still think about some of them every day when I'm doing my reading and my writing and my teaching. It was very impactful.
Who are some notable people who had influence on you as a professor?
I'd say my favorite professor, and he's passed away, and I'm so sorry about that because I'd love to go out and visit him. His name was Stephen Booth. He was a Shakespeare professor.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I'm not a Shakespeare person at all.
Yeah.
Not even then, but he taught me so much about writing and reading and the importance of like every single line and every single word in a line, and every word has to carry its weight. And not so much what the words mean, but also what they're doing, kind of impact they have in your brain. Like just the other day, I was teaching in my class, and one of the things I really like to do with my students is I like to put their work on the overhead and just like examine their writing almost like it's poetry, even though it's not, but like poetry kind of creeps in. And one of the students was writing about some fast food place and talking about the soda being fresh and fizzy. And I told the students, can you hear that? Can you hear that in your brain? Can you see it? Can you taste it? And those words that she used about it being fizzy and fresh, it's just, it kind of reminded me of my Shakespeare professor about how every word counts, and every word, creates a certain sensation in the brain, And I think, Stephen Booth, he was one who taught me how to read and taught me how to write and basically taught me how to teach when I was 19. And I was a terrible student then, and I was not his favorite student, but he made a huge impact on me. Huge.
Yeah, I had a somewhat similar experience with Shakespeare. I was a science math person, went to a liberal arts college, Haverford College in Pennsylvania, and I took a Shakespeare seminar.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I think, about 8 or 10 individuals taught by a gentleman named Alfred Satterthwaite.
Uh-huh.
And later I found out he was involved in the resistance in France. But and he actually wrote a novel or something about that. But anyway, he looked like the Penguin. And we met once a week.
Uh-huh.
At night. He would walk in with a glass of red wine.
Mm-hmm.
Shakespeare in his satchel. He would take it out, and we read, I think it was 4 or 5 tragedies, and he would go through it line by line.
Yes.
He wouldn't go through the whole play during class, but it was sort of a masterful, let's read Hamlet,
Yes.
these set of phrases.
Yes.
And I think that was really it was by far the best course that I took at the college.
Yeah.
And I had read Shakespeare in high school, didn't make much of an impression, but here it was the power of the words, right? And
yes.
Yeah. And each word.
Well, one thing I remember about what Professor Booth would say is that Shakespeare was famous for making puns, making jokes. But these jokes and these puns, they were just halfway made. They were just subliminal. They were just halfway there. And so that would, in our brains, that would cause us to finish the pun ourselves, to finish the joke ourselves, almost like going on a scavenger hunt of the brain and just completing it. And what he said is that we enjoy doing that. We enjoy solving puzzles. And somehow Shakespeare had tapped into that kind of enjoyment of solving the puzzle. And I just thought that was so interesting. It wasn't so much just what the words were saying, it's what they were doing, the experience of the reader. And, and I take that kind of lesson from him and I use it in my own teaching with, like I said, with my students, and I'll go through it line by line. When I read this line, this is what I'm thinking in my brain. This is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm imagining. And, and I really try to convey that to the students too, like basically what he conveyed to us through this complex reading of Shakespeare. You can do this at like a lot of different levels.
Yeah, and so the way he taught it, as I'm hearing what you're saying, is that it was also an invitation for the reader as reading and interpretation is a creative act.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, right. It's an active act, yes. And creative act, definitely.
All right, so let's turn a little bit to, you mentioned your dad he didn't want you to be a lawyer. Yeah. What did he want you to do?
He wanted me to become a chemical engineer like him. He wanted me to become a chemical engineer. My dad's very, very famous. His name's Norm Lieberman. He's written like 12 technical books. Plus, we wrote a book together called My Race Against Death, which is about his obsession with running. And my dad didn't have a lot of opinions. He just thought I should become an engineer, and which I had no interest in, and which is too bad because he's really successful. But he's also a writer. Like I said, we're all writers. He wanted me to become an engineer, but he's always been very proud of my writing and has always encouraged me about that. And so that's been really nice.
And did you learn, or what did you learn from your father?
My dad
is he influenced your writing?
Well, absolutely. I think, the way I write and the way my father writes, you really can't tell the difference who's writing. For some reason, I have the same voice as he has writing-wise. And I don't know how I picked that up, but we wrote this book together. I told you, My Race Against Death, and you really can't tell when he's doing the writing and when I'm doing the writing. My dad is an amazing storyteller, and he told us stories every day when we were children, and bedtime stories and things like that. And he just has a way of telling a story that draws the audience in. And some of the things I learned about writing from my dad was, if your reader loses interest, that's your fault. It's the writer's fault. Yep. That's what I tell my students when I'm teaching. It's, if I don't understand what you've said, it's your fault. The writer has to draw the reader in. It's always about drawing the reader in and hooking them in so they just can't wait to hear what you're about to say next. And my dad was like that as a storyteller, and he's like that as a teacher of storytelling too, the way he talks about it.
So what does your dad do exactly? He's a chemical engineer, but what?
A couple things. One is he turns oil into gasoline. And two is that he goes around the world and he fixes problems other people can't fix. He and my stepmother, Elizabeth Lieberman, they work together, process chemicals engineering, based out of Louisiana. And, my stepmother sometimes says, well, they're the engineers of last resort. If nobody can fix it, they're going to call the Liebermans. And they travel all around the world, like Venezuela, Africa, the Middle East. My dad was supposed to go to Saudi Arabia recently, but we tried to dissuade him from that. My dad's 82, by the way, and he's still working like a madman. But what he does is he's kind of like a plumber, sort of, for oil refineries. If there's a problem, he can go into the refinery and he sort of listens to the machines. And they call him you've heard of the horse whisperer, the dog whisperer. They call him the refinery whisperer. He can kind of just go in and talk to the operators who work on the ground and go around and test and sort of like thump the equipment, whatever he does. And he can pretty much fix anything and make anything run better. And he teaches seminars. People come from all around the world to hear him teach. And basically what he teaches is kind of what I've tried to adopt in my own classroom, which is going back to basic principles, simplicity. When I'm teaching, I tell the students there's two rules mainly. One, don't confuse the reader. Don't confuse the reader. Don't bore the reader, and be clear. And my dad kind of has that philosophy, or maybe I got that philosophy from him, where he looks for the simplest possible solution. And he's also really good about going into these refineries without preconceived notions.
Yeah.
He's very ready to walk in and have a certain idea about how to fix something, walk in and realize he's completely wrong and somebody else is completely right. And I think that's the thing I admire the most about my dad and his work, is that he has the ability to do a 180-degree turn. And which is kind of how engineers are built, because they're really, not so politically motivated, not so psychologically motivated. They're more like, what's the bottom line? How do I fix this problem? Which I kind of apply that idea to writing. If I've written something or if a student has written something and it doesn't make sense, how do we fix it?
Yeah. So say a little bit more about that. So your dad is a troubleshooter.
Yes.
Troubleshooter in the sense of, hey, I have a problem that other people have not been able to solve. He parachutes in and he's got to fix this problem, right? And there's a process that you have begun to describe. So in what sense, I mean, we ordinarily don't think of writing and engineering as similar or analogous, but are they? I mean, in what sense? Yeah.
I think so, because it's all about troubleshooting and trying to fix a problem. You might write a paragraph and there's a problem with it. It doesn't sound right. It doesn't feel right. It's not getting the message across. It's not creating that kind of reaction in the reader that you want. And you kind of have to just mess with it sometimes. And sometimes you fall in love with a certain phrase or a sentence or a word, but you need to take that phrase or sentence or word out because it's not working. Writing is all about, putting thoughts together and it's kind of like putting the pieces of a puzzle together to create a certain reaction, a certain kind of sensation, a certain kind of reaction in the reader that you want. And it's a lot like that with engineering too. How do I get these pieces of equipment, complex equipment, to work? How do I adjust the temperature on this pump, or what do I do to just make it work? Yep. What can you do to make it work, basically? So I do see a lot of similarities between engineering and writing, and logical thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. What comes to mind is a phrase from William Zinsser. He wrote On Writing Well, and one of my favorite books is Writing to Learn. And he, I think it's in Writing to Learn where Zinsser says, clear writing is the logical arrangement of thought.
Yeah.
And it comes back to, the idea of your mentioning that writing is in some ways like solving a puzzle. And what are you trying to do? You're trying to find the arrangement, a logical arrangement that fits, right? In that sense, the starting off, it's a mystery. It's a puzzle.
Yes.
And what's the best arrangement, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And the other thought that you're expressing, the let's call it the approach, the methodology that an engineer has is keeping an open mind, because
Absolutely.
you don't. Of course, you have assumptions, but you have to be clear about what your assumptions are, right? Okay, I'm coming into a situation, and here are my starting assumptions, but I have to be ready to throw those out.
Absolutely.
Right? You're not going to be a good troubleshooter if you're just coming in with a understanding already, a preconception of what the problem is.
Yes,
Right?
definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so let's turn a little bit to, you wrote an article recently in the Chronicle of Higher Education.
Yes.
Called AI and the Death of Student Writing.
Yeah.
What prompted you to write the article?
Well, so I was teaching an online class, basically an American literature class, and I've been teaching pretty steadily for the last 12 years at community colleges, freshman composition, business writing, literature classes, and I was teaching this online literature class, and I started noticing, and I've been doing this a while, so I know what I really know what student writing feels like. And I started getting this last semester was when I really noticed it. I hadn't noticed it before, but I started noticing that there were some students who were just turning in these paragraphs that were just so professionally written that they really looked like they were like coming from Harvard graduate level students. And it just didn't feel like they wrote those sentences. And then I went online and I thought, well, what is this all about? And I started looking at AI checkers. And I would plug in some of the writing into these checkers, and some of them would come and they'd give you percentages, how much of this was generated by AI. And I barely knew what AI was myself, but I investigated it. And then I discovered, I really, like my story, my essay says, it was about 1/3, maybe a little less, maybe a quarter of students who were doing this. They would just plug in the parameters for the assignment, and then boom, there'd be an 800-word, 1,000-word essay, some explicating the topic, and the sentences were just not sentences that I felt like that they were writing. And like I said, I would plug them in, and then it would show up as written by AI. And I wasn't sure what to do with that, so I kind of had to feel my way through what to do with that. So I didn't start out writing that essay right away. This was a problem that I was having. And that's how most of my stories start. Like I'm having some kind of a problem in my life or something I'm observing. How do I make sense of this, right? And so I started off by, I teach at 3 colleges, and I think I ended up talking to about 3 different administrators, emailing them. And I said, look, I think this student is using AI to write their essays. What do I do? And here's the interesting part is that none of them had an answer. There was no answer.
Yeah. What also struck me was in reading your essay, one of the dilemmas here is also, it's not as if the student took everything or got everything from AI. It's a spectrum, right? So
it's a spectrum, absolutely.
Yeah, and so I think just as a statistic that you give is, you notice that probably about 1/3, at least 1/3 of your students now seem to be using AI in one form or another. But then there's also another question, which we also raise, is at what point what a student who completely relies on AI to, what if I use a 1/3 or a half? What am I supposed to do, right? And
right.
Is that, yeah.
So that was puzzling too. There were some students where it was 100% AI, and
yeah,
and I would email them and say, would you like to talk about this? And then if they never got back to me, if they just got the 0 and they never wanted to discuss it, I knew that they were using AI. But some of them would want to discuss it, and I had some phone conversations with some students. And yeah, I mean, here's the problem: is that there are some people who is 100%, and that's just a zero. And then there were some people who would use it some of the times. But here was a bigger issue: is that it turned out, which I say in my story, that the school, all of the schools, and I'm finding this to be increasingly true, and it's happening rapidly. The schools are providing students with software that will tighten up their writing.
Yeah.
And, I can't penalize students for using school software, And actually, since we last spoke, I've become more confused about this whole issue. Or, I mean, I don't want to say confused, but my thinking is less black and white. And, I have some ideas that are maybe a little bit different from what I wrote about in that story, the AI story.
So say what they are.
Well, I think, like I said, and a lot of this just has to do with I can't penalize students for using software that the school is giving them. And I can't do anything about this, that the school is giving them software to make the writing easier. I want to give you an example. I was teaching a class this summer. It was online. And I had this one student, and his writing just kept popping out as 100% AI. And I was all on my high horse, and this is wrong. And I said, no AI. And I talked to the director of studies, and he didn't know quite what to do. And so I arranged a phone call with a student, which I'm very glad I did, because I was all set to give him a 0. And he was a young man, about 22, I think, father, 2.5-year-old son. He worked at some kind of a mental health facility as a counselor. And so that kind of just impressed me, this young guy doing very difficult work, trying to help people at a mental health facility. And I said, what's a good time to talk? And he said at noon. So it kind of struck me that he was working full time and that he was taking off on his lunch break, and he was going out to his car so he could have a private conversation with me. And he sounded really, worried and upset. And I really wanted to make sure that, I don't want to make these pronouncements without really knowing that I'm right, about giving someone a bad grade. And so I said, well, can you explain the essay to me? And then he was very literate and very articulate in explaining the essay. And then I said, you're right. I believe you. I'm sorry. And here I was about to condemn him, and I felt really bad about it. But with that said, also, I still think he used AI. I still, internally, I didn't really believe he wrote all of those sentences. And then I was trying to, flesh this out with him. And I said, why is this ringing up as AI? And he said, you know what? Sometimes I would be writing something, and then the software would just change the wording for me. Sometimes it would add in a semicolon or a colon. And to me, when he said that, I just thought, I'm going to have to grade so differently. I'm just going to really have to give the students the benefit of the doubt, because this software was going in and changing things for him without him even really asking. And so in the end, I did think he might have input some stuff into AI chat box, and it might have been a combination of that and a combination of the software doing the work for him involuntarily. But the thing is I think over time, teachers are going to have to change the way they grade. And I know I am. I'm not sure how it's going to be, but I always want to be fair to the students. I was very upset thinking I might have made a mistake, and I was really glad that we spoke. So, he got his grade.
Yep.
It was just kind of disconcerting to me. Like, how is it that I could be so wrong?
Yeah. So let's just note, several things. One that you mentioned is it's not just ChatGPT, but Grammarly, and now pretty much lots of companies and tools are incorporating AI. I just saw recently McGraw-Hill Education is coming out. I used to work there. They've come out with some sort of software, and they promote the idea that they're using now generative AI to assist students with their writing. And so, we'll see more and more of this. So that's not, this is becoming pervasive.
Yeah.
The second is different degrees of using AI. Instead of hiring an editor, any grammatical errors here, just you do a quick check, right?
Yeah.
It saves me time. Is that cheating? I don't think so, right?
Yeah. What I'm telling my students now, just because I want to be black and white and very clear, I just say, don't use anything. Spell check is okay. But I suspect that that's going to change pretty quickly. That kind of standard of thinking is going to have to change. I imagine 1 year from now, I won't be giving that answer.
Yeah. Now, and we can also, I think, note that there's very little guidance coming from schools and administration. Not
There's
that
no guidance.
It's just, I think everyone's sort of struggling with this. But what struck me about your article is a different topic, and that's not so much about cheating, but what gets lost. Okay, when we could be a student or it could be just a writer, when I start resorting, and what is that?
Well, I want to mention that, the last time we spoke, I said I hadn't really looked into it very much, but I thought, well, I'm going to look into it. And I opened up one of the sites, and then I put in my prompt for my essay, where I asked a specific question, like what is, for example, the Stanford Prison Experiment conducted by Phil Zimbardo in the 1970s. We do an essay related to that. And then I plugged in the question, what is the Stanford Prison Experiment and what is the meaning of it? And I was kind of blown away when the chat box said, well, do you want this written in paragraph form? Do you want this in bullet points? Do you want it with detail? Do you want it to be more general? Do you want it to sound academic, casual, friendly, professional? And I went through a few of those variations, and I was pretty shocked and surprised that it just would hit the nail right on the head. And I think for students taking classes, history classes, psychology classes, English classes, it's just going to be unavoidable. It's just going to be too easy to use that. But in terms of like what gets lost, I remember being a kid in high school, and I always liked to read and analyze. And, I was the type of kid, and I still am with the books, I'd underline things, make squiggle marks and notes in the margins. And these were just thoughts that were coming to me. It was just between me and the text. There was no outside influence telling me what to think, except maybe things we talked about in class. It was just like I write in my story that it was like a real kind of exchange between, writer and reader, like a direct relationship without an intermediary.
Yep.
And I guess, this AI is it going to be the intermediary, and there's just absolutely no way to stop it. Maybe we shouldn't stop it. I don't know. I mean, I tend to think, and one of my administrators had said this, and I thought it was a good thing to say, that AI removes the need for cognitive thought, for critical thinking, because why would you have to think when you can just plug this in and it gives you all the answers for the essay question, and you just plug it in. It's just kind of plug and play like Legos. I guess, it takes out some of the creativity, I think. And it takes out the work, it takes out, some of the spinning cogs in your brain coming up with these answers and these thoughts.
Yeah. So I thought your essay was sort of operating at two levels. One is we can think of writing instrumentally. It's a skill that is necessary. We all need to be able to write, and for a job, for communication in all facets of life. It's a skill that we need. And one of the things that might get lost if writing, reading, and thinking are equivalent in a deep way, then something that you're losing is the ability to think. Okay.
Yes.
Now, we can kind of hold that thought. And that would just be an instrumental thing, right? People, they need a skill, and you have this illusion that you're learning to write,
Yes.
but taking this shortcut, you're losing the ability to think. And this comes back also to your experience with your dad is, hey, thinking, one of the aspects of thinking is troubleshooting.
Yeah.
You're solving a problem,
Yes.
and you have to figure out what the logical arrangement of this problem is,
Yeah.
whether the problem is scientific or poetical, whatever, right? It's
Yeah.
and that ability is getting lost, so you're
Yes.
really losing the ability to think. But I think you also kind of made a deeper point, or a different point, about there's something that also is getting lost, and that, if I could just read it, and this is your experience at Berkeley. I take my copy of Wallace Stevens' The Palm at the End of the Mind, or Chaucer's The Wife of Bat's Tale, and pick a nice sunny spot on campus and so on. But it was more than just an idyllic thing, right? You say, hey, as I scribbled my notes and wrote my essays, I was talking back to the author.
Yes.
It was a specific and deep relationship between reader and writer. It felt like magic.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
What? Say more about that. What is that experience that you were trying to describe there?
Yeah. It's like, I think we've talked before about reading as children and books as children, and like the Phantom Toll House booth. You kind of get lost. It's almost like a childlike wonder that you have as
Yep.
a child, like when you're sitting in kindergarten and you're lying on your mats and your teacher's reading you a story, and you just get lost in the story. And what I was doing in college was kind of the grown-up version of
Yep.
that, of the same thing. You get lost in the text, and then you add to it, which is really what academia is all about. You join the conversation. Yep. You join the academic conversation. You join the author in some kind of a conversation, and it feels like a real relationship. It feels like you're having a relationship with this author, and which is why I'm always sad when I finish a really good book. Like the end of the relationship is kind of it. And I remember doing my senior thesis on Wallace Stevens, and sitting on the grass, and just this little book, and I would spend months just underlying passages, and getting really, really deep into it. It's almost like Alice in Wonderland, where you just kind of go down a rabbit hole, and you just find whole new worlds, and you discover new things about yourself and your writing and your thinking and your thoughts and the people around you, and you see the world in a different way. It really is the world of reading and the world of writing are just really magical places for everybody who wants to access them.
Yep. Yeah, it made me think a little bit of Emerson. I think what he had just written his essays called Nature.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was 1837 or so, where he was invited by Harvard to give a talk by the Phi Beta Kappa Society, and I think it's called now the American Scholar, mm-hmm. where he sort of reflects on what is the nature of scholarship, but not scholarship in the way we think about it. What is it to be a scholar and the American scholar? And there is this idea of becoming part of the community of scholars, of writers and thinkers, and also this one mind, right? We each one of us is sort of a fragment of this larger conversation. And that's what reading and writing and thinking is. What makes it magical is you're entering this community of scholars, thinkers, and it's not abstract in the sense of and that's one of the themes that he also develops is the connection to action. So when he's saying thinking, it's not just abstract thought, but action.
Yes.
And I was thinking about that is what is the magic that's getting lost? So yeah, we can think of it instrumentally. Okay, you're losing a skill.
Yes.
You may be fooling yourself. Yeah, it's necessary. The writing and thinking and reading are all tied together. And
Yes.
I'm not a neurologist, but I'm sure the brain, there's probably lots of scholarship that these three things are integrally collected. And so that's one of the things that's lost.
Yes.
But I think something that I think you all also were intimating was this idea of this magic, right? What that are entering into some sort of community, larger community.
Right. Right.
Let's go down a few more thoughts. You're also a visual artist. How did that start? Have you always been? And so tell us about that.
No, I've never been an artist really before. I'll tell you a story. My grandmother, writing runs in my family, and so does painting. Painting runs in my family. My grandmother was an artist, and I have a cousin who illustrates children's books. She's really an amazing artist. My grandmother started painting when she was 50. She had decided she was, a New York Jew, and decided she wanted to decorate her apartment, and she wanted to find out how much it was going to cost to buy some paintings. And there was something that was $1,000, and she said, "Well, for that, I'll just go home and paint my own." And I started actually painting when I was about 50, also. And I just kind of started with that, and it's a nice outlet because it's a lot like writing in the. So it's kind of or I should say, writing is like painting with words. Writing is painting with words. And I would never consider myself a professional painter, but I have sold a couple pieces, and I've had a couple of art shows locally. Yeah, I like to paint. It's physical, it's visceral, it's immediate. You're accessing a different part of the brain, a part of the brain that doesn't have words.
Yeah.
And
are there similarities to writing, and what are those?
Absolutely, yeah. And I've discovered this because I live in an artist town, and I've had a lot of artists, really talented artist friends, and I've watched them, come up with their work, and it's really the same exact thing as writing. They have kind of an idea for something and just kind of sketch it out sort of roughly with pencil. And it really, it kind of starts with a feeling, with an emotion, with a thought, kind of a singular kind of feeling. And they'll sketch it out, and then with pencil, and it doesn't happen all at once. It happens over time. And then, you put the paint on, and then it kind of starts to come to life, and you add layer after layer after layer. And I was talking about this with my students the other day. We're talking about rewriting. I basically tell them the secret to good writing is rewriting. And someone was saying something about a rough draft and a final draft. And I said, that those aren't really good terms because or there's no such thing as a final draft. And then someone said, "Oh yeah, like you rewrite to fix your mistakes." And I said, "No, it's not like that, because writing is you layer on. Every time you read what you've written, you layer on, and you get deeper and deeper and deeper. And it's like that with the paintings. It gets deeper. For people who do oil paintings or any kind of painting, you add on layers and layers and layers until it starts to take shape, and it kind of resembles what you had in your mind. And when I say resembles what you had in your mind, I don't necessarily mean a specific image. I mean a specific feeling that it evokes. The painting has to evoke a feeling, and the piece of writing has to evoke some kind of a feeling, or some kind of an emotional response. So yeah, I think painting and writing are so much the same.
Yeah, this idea of layering, right?
Yeah.
You're discovering that in the writing process, meaning you your own thought becomes clear in the sense of not just the thought, but the thought process.
Yeah.
Here's what I understand. This is working. How am I trying to rearrange it? Right? You have this kind of this dual back and forth.
Yeah.
And that's also something that gets lost. If you, it's a type of self-awareness of.
Oh yeah.
Let me kind of give you an example. I've started another book on AI.
Yeah.
It's for a non-technical audience, but the first part, I'm writing about macroeconomics in technology and setting a little bit of context. And there's this in macroeconomics, there's a famous model of growth called the Solow growth model. It's named after an economist named Robert Solow at MIT. I know nothing about macroeconomics. And so as I'm writing, I'm learning about macroeconomics.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
But the thought structure is I have to be clear about what I'm not clear about.
Yes.
What my assumptions are as I'm kind of working it out.
Yeah.
So I'm learning as I'm writing, but then I also have to be clear about what I know, what I understand, what I don't understand, go back, rearrange things.
Yes.
And that's also kind of a fascinating sort of process, right?
Yes.
Learning your own mind as it's shaping things
Right.
as we're going. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I think, getting that right order is kind of a magical, mystical sort of a process. And, it brings to mind the idea that bad writing has to precede good writing. Like when I was first starting out and I thought, I just don't know if I can do this. I want to do this, but can I do it? And I would just, every time I would sit down and say, well, this might not be any good, but I'm going to do it anyway. You got to just be willing to risk putting something down that's not going to work in order to do something that will work. And that process just kind of unfolds. And eventually, and I know myself well enough now, like if I'm struggling with something, and a lot of writing is a struggle, but if I'm struggling with something and it's just in my unconscious, I might have a hard time with this paragraph. And then the next day I'll realize, okay, well, this is how it ought to go.
Yeah.
It's kind of a mystical process, the way it works. And I kind of think the unconscious mind you set the unconscious mind up. Well, I've got this issue, this paragraph I've got to write, and how do I do it? And then it will just kind of like come out somehow.
Let me finish up with a final question. How do you think this AI stuff is going to play itself out when it comes to teaching and learning?
Well, I think it's interesting to look at the broader picture also. When I used to be a farm reporter and I'd write about, crops in California versus crops in Florida, there might be some kind of a weather event. Maybe there'd be a hailstorm in California and that would ruin the tree fruit market out here for California, but it'd be great for the growers in Florida. I think AI is going to be like that for a lot of industries. It's going to be good for some people and bad for other people. And I want to answer your question about teaching and writing, but I want to make this other point too. I have friends who work in the movie industry in Hollywood. They're set designers and graphic art type people. And someone was describing to me the industry, saying there's above the line and then there's below the line. Now the above the line people are people like the writers and the actors and the directors and the producers. And AI, they're basically still going to have their jobs, but for people below the line, the set designers and the graphic artists, they're going to be replaced by AI. That is going to happen. As far as I understand. Now, in terms of teaching and writing, like if it were up to me, I would just want to banish it. But I that's not realistic. It's just not a realistic thought. It is entering the school system. The students are using it. And I don't know personally how I'm going to adapt to it. I think the way other teachers are going to adapt to it is that they're going to incorporate it into their classrooms because there's no choice. And probably I will too. And there might be more of a push towards oral presentations where you do the research and you use AI to basically do the writing for you. And then you become the medium for AI to express these ideas that you're getting from the computer. That feels like the way it's going to go. But I am not sure. I just know that students are going to use it, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Elisa, so much. This has been a great and illuminating discussion, and hope to talk to you soon.
Okay.
Take care.
Sounds good.